Okay, we had some coordinating to do, which doesn't compare to what Ingrid Schaffner has been doing over the last 3 years. But just a few introductory remarks. I'm Carin Kuoni, I'm the director of the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, and really delighted to present to you today a presentation by Ingrid Schaffner, the curator of the 57th edition of the Carnegie International. I'm also really delighted to do this in collaboration with Renaud Proche, who is the executive director of ICI, Independent Curators International. And I just realized, Renaud, we've been in these situations for quite some time. And in various configurations and on various opportunities where we presented talks by ICI curators here. I myself go back to ICI. I was the director of programs or exhibitions for a while. There were other exhibitions we worked on, workshops, lectures, artist talks, and a book, yes. This moment, however, of the two organizations, the Vera List Center and ICI, coming together is quite special. And it's made special because of all of you, but also because of one particular person. And I'd just like to offer a brief shout out to Amanda Palmer, who is the curator at the Vera List Center for another few hours and will be very soon the director of programs at ICI. Maybe I will then move on to introduce my dear friend Ingrid Schaffner, who doesn't need an introduction. Just want to remind you that she was curator of the ICA in Philadelphia for 15 years and worked on a number of independent exhibitions in various settings, also at the Swiss Institute, which I ran for a number of years. First as an independent curator and then coming to the ICI for 15 years, and you've been appointed the director of the Carnegie International, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. I had the good fortune of being invited to be a travel companion of yours, so we took a trip to West Africa, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that in a moment. It would be nice now, maybe Renaud, if you would say a few words about ICI and the particular qualities of an independent curator.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Carin, for this introduction. And just to add a quick few words, again, reiterating how wonderful it's been to collaborate with the New School and with you and with the Vera List Center for Art and Politics over all those years. We're thrilled to have Amanda start as ICI's Director of Programs on Monday. And it's also ICI is a network of curators that stretches across the world and also stretches across the country, and we've been thrilled to have collaborations with such brilliant thinkers as Ingrid Schaffner for many, many years now. And I just want to say, maybe as an introduction to this talk, that it's the idea of thinking about the international in this very moment is fascinating to me, and I think it's really wonderful that we have the opportunity before the exhibition opens to speak to Ingrid and to get from her some of the perspectives and the thinking and the vision behind the importance of thinking about the international, not only in this moment, but also how the concept might have changed for her over the last 2-3 years of research. International meant something very different in 2016 when she started this project, I think. It's just how fast the cultural, political, economic context around us changes. So I think this is one thing that is very important to keep in mind before this talk, but also keeping in mind that when we hear from curators, we hear somehow about the behind the scenes, what happens behind the efforts that are put in bringing artists together and creating these connections, creating knowledge, creating meaning. So I think it's very fortunate that we have this opportunity to hear directly from Ingrid about the way that she decided to structure the Carnegie International this year, and particularly this model of inviting very generously, I think, 5 curators to accompany her on research travels internationally, one of them being, of course, Carin, and I really look forward to a conversation after Ingrid's presentation between the two of you. So I'm not going to monopolize the mic any longer. And thank you again, Carin, for the invitation. I want to really thank everybody for coming tonight on this Friday night. It's really wonderful to hear Ingrid Schaffner. So please help me in welcoming Ingrid Schaffner.
Can we bring the lights down?
No, because then we won't be able to videotape it.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to begin by setting the curatorial table and present the many moving parts of this exhibition quickly, starting with my curatorial team: Ashley McNeilis, curatorial assistant; Liz Park, associate curator. Maybe we're standing in front of one of the works of art in the Carnegie International. Here's the world headquarters for the Carnegie International, our office. And you see on the wall Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map of the world, which we say is the international field. It shows the continents in true relative scale to one another. There's no proper orientation, so this was the field. And I like the way that map feels a little bit like our own building, an Edward Larrabee Barnes building from 1974 with this great Richard Serra standing outside, 1985, Serra. And here's the museum sleeping, waiting for the Carnegie International. So to work on this show, this becomes, this space, the Hall of Sculpture, it becomes a sort of framing shot for sort of iconic works of past internationals. So. Here, 2013, Pedro Reis, instrumental sculpture, Badoon Library. 2008, Mike Kelly's Candor, Lights Down. Lights Up for Mangelos in 2004. 1999, Martin Kippenberger's America. Donald Judd, it was a posthumous installation of his work. And then in 1991, Alan McCullum made this installation, casting fossils from the museums. The museum is attached to and part of a museum of natural history. So fossils from the Natural History Museum's famous collection became part of Alan's boneyard. So it remains to be seen what will be here in October when you come to the International. So thinking about these sort of framing moments, these iconic moments, is also to think about the curators who made these exhibitions. And one thing I'm thinking a lot with this International is a short history of the contemporary as told through the Carnegie International from 1991 till now and moving forward. And you can tell a story about the institutionalization of the contemporary through this exhibition. Lynn Cook, Mark Francis were the first curators invited to bring their expertise from outside into the museum to organize its signature show. So 1991, and their exhibition busted outside of the walls of the museum. There were locations throughout the city, Christopher Wool painting, a sign, show's over. And yes, this is an image from a book, but I have to show it to you. Hiroshi Sugimoto in our sculpture court made it into a gallery. There was a wall, there are photographs hanging on it, and then there are photographs hanging on the waterfall, which in the wintertime froze over. So yes, Richard Armstrong in 1995, invited Rear Crit Terra-Venetia to participate, and there was the free was open with Rear Crit serving Thai curry on the days that the health department didn't shut him down. Madeline Grinstein out the MCA Chicago, Laura Hopman, soon to become the director of the Drawing Center, Douglas Fogel, 2008. This was the first international to have a literary title, Life on Mars. Douglas Aikens turned the facade of the museum into a drive-by movie theater with this amazing projection. It was on the back end, the front of the building. My immediate predecessors, Dan Byers, Tina Kukalski, Daniel Bauman, a trio, and we're back on the balcony. And this work by Nicole Eisenman remains. So it was acquired from the Carnegie International. So another part of this exhibition its legacy is that a lot of work is acquired for the museum and its collection through the International. So the International really impacts this institution deeply. So there's Nicole's work, which you will see is still sitting there, slumping, texting. So this is Winslow Homer's The Wreck from 1896. That was the first Carnegie International. And this work has the auspicious accession number of 1. So, and here it is, the first Carnegie International, 1896. Those are high school students. So Andrew Carnegie starts the institute, the Carnegie Institute in 1895, visits the Venice Biennale, says, well, I want one of those for Pittsburgh, and has an ulterior motive to fill this museum that he has built for the people of Pittsburgh from their industry and labor to fill the museum. He's not so interested in art, more interested in dinosaurs. So it really has been a collecting mechanism from its very beginning. This will be the 57th, another Pittsburgh industry, very auspicious. Opens on October 13th, very soon. We will celebrate with ferns, as is the tradition. On the night of the big banquet, look at the flags, is also the naming of the Carnegie Prize. So there is a prize. There are 2 prizes now, which come with money. And so with prizes, there are jurors. So one year, Marcel Duchamp was a juror with Vincent Price, yes, the movie actor, who was also a collector. And I just recently learned he was, at that moment in time, working hard to get Pasadena to acquire the Ahrensburg collection. So he was sticking to Marcel like dust. A history of jurors, also a history of advisors. From the very beginning, artists were advisors on who would be in the Carnegie International. So Whistler and Mary Cassatt advised in the first Carnegie International. More recently, the curators have had cadres of curator advisors like Bicha Kuriger and Okweon Wieser have been advisors to the Carnegie International. So I think of all these sort of constellations of our peers also being part of shaping the history of this short history of the contemporary. So this is the first international to have no advisors per se. Instead, I had companions. So I invited 5 colleagues to each go on a big research trip to me to be a traveling and thinking partner. I was like, I'll pay, but you determine where we're going to go. And so it was the trajectory of my colleagues' research that helped me get off my own beaten path. So just quickly, because Carin and I think we'll talk about this, as Carin was one of the companions. Here they are. Here are the 5 companions. And these were 2-week trips. There's the golden ticket. Yeah. And I have to say, Carin and I, we go way back. But others, it was like cold call. They got an email one day from Ingrid Schaffner saying, want to go on a trip with me? Okay, so quickly, Carin Kuoni and I went to, we started in Marrakesh, Riyam Fadah's Marrakesh Biennial, and then we went to Descartes, and then we went to Lagos to experience a megacity of the future. Ruba Katrib wanted to go to the Caucasus region, and so we did. Dorian Chong and I, here's Dorian, I should say Ruba, at that time was the curator at Sculpture Center. Now she is at PS1 MoMA. Dorian, the chief curator of the M+ Museum of Modern Art of Asia, Museum in the Making. We went to India. B.C. Silva, the founder of the Center for Contemporary Art in Lagos, also the itinerant art school ASICO. We followed BZ's interest in art of the African diaspora and traveled in the Caribbean. And with Magali Areola, an independent curator based in Mexico City, the sort of starting point for our travel was she was interested in this, in the trade routes between Mexico and the Philippines when both were colonies of Spain. So from there we went to Singapore and Vietnam. So the traveling companions were truly companions. They were not tasked with advising me. It was a time to be conducting research and creative travel conversation with a colleague. But the travels didn't end when we all came back. I wanted the trajectory of the trip to continue, these trips to continue, and commissioned 5 writers who did not go on the trip, to each take accounts of the travel as points of departure for their own writing. So a series of travelogue essays have come out of the travel and research for the Carnegie International. And Emmanuel Aduma wrote the first to the trip that Carin and I made, and it begins with his uncle's death in Abuja, and on page 8, 2 white women, Carin and Ingrid, come walking through his narrative. It's a truly fabulous account. And I'm Emmanuel, I don't remember that you knew Saba Inab, this artist that we met in Marrakesh. He said, well, I did it until you and Carin introduced me through the account of your tale. So it's an astonishing piece of writing, and Emmanuel's here, and read it. And each travelogue has taken its own form. Myra Kalman illustrated the adventures of Ingrid and Ruba in the Caucasus. So here's Vato Tassarelli in the Center for Contemporary Art in Tbilisi. And here's Vato. So the travelogues are published on the exhibition's website. So here is our website. And it is a platform for publication. It's a place for news, the readings about the Carnegie International, the travelogues, and also programs. So the public programming also began pretty much as soon as I did, with a programmatic thread that will continue right on through the International, where the participants in the exhibition conduct drawing sessions. So I conducted the first one here in the Hall of Sculpture. It was a big rout of almost 100 people playing the game of Exquisite Corpse. More recently, here's Dayanita Singh introducing us to her idea of the Pocket Museum. And then we designed our own intimate garments for such exhibitions. So the idea is to draw community around a creative activity and get closer to the participants' thinking and work. They have this crazy name, which I sometimes regret, having named them, they're called the Tam O'Shanter Drawing Sessions. And they are echoing the Carnegie Museum's storied free art classes for children since 1979. I say storied because generations of people and artists took these art classes. Like Andy Warhol was a Tam O'Shanter. And then the name itself, Tam O'Shanter is kind of like a Scottish beret. This is the Robbie Burns sculpture outside the museum. Carnegie was Scottish. There's much Scottish affect around the Carnegie, so the Tam O'Shanter drawing sessions, and they are ongoing. The next one, Rachel Rose is conducting. So back on the website. So I'm proud of this, so bear with me. The website is a tool where you can search. You can put an artist's name and see if they were in a past international. You pop in their Whistler, and I don't have the slide. I took away the slide. Anyways, you would have seen that Whistler was in many, many shows, and as an artist, as a juror, and there hadn't really been a database. It's such a simple database, but there hadn't really been this tool for the institution. So we've been building little tools for the institution using the history of the Carnegie International and our time there. So under readings right now, you would find an essay recently published by the International by Prem Krishnamurthy on the design of the Carnegie International, so from travelogue to typologue. And here's Prem Krishnamurthy, and here's Prem Krishnamurthy with Karen Kelly and Barbara Schroeder. And I'm going to introduce you now to the creative team for the Carnegie International. And they are standing on a Mel Bachner sculpture on the campus of CMU. Here's the creative team. So I engaged these creatives to be consultants, advisors, integral to the making of this exhibition from the very start, so that there would be design and editorial through lines for the whole project. So here they are, and we have been convening annually for charrettes. So they come to town, and we have this intense couple days where we truly are holed up around questions developing the International. Once we actually did go away to a cabin and spent the weekend there charretting. And so the charrettes, so the sort of a design has been structured by, Pittsburgh is a city of bridges. So I had this idea of, we start simple with the truss, and then there's a truss bridge, and then fuss, so things get more elaborated. And then the third phase of the design will be catenary, where things get really elemental. So each of the publications expresses one of these design phases. You can kind of feel how the website felt very truss-like, practically it was typed on the screen. So we're now moving into the fuss phase, and this is the guide publication. So this is the guide that will bring you into the exhibition. You can see in fuss things get a bit florid. So here's our little guide, and it's truly modeled on a 19th century travel guide, a guide to modern travel. And then that's the first Carnegie International catalog, and it's also hand-sized. So the idea is it's a handheld tool to help you navigate the exhibition. And like all good guides, this is the table of contents. It tells you about the customs of museums and something of the history of the Carnegie International. And the language, there's a pronunciation guide for artists' names, but also all this sort of language of truss, fuss, and catenary. There's a lot of language accrued around this international and its structure and phases. The economy, the Carnegie International is the first biennial style exhibition to receive wage certification from the WAGE stands for Working Artists for a Great Economy. So every artist who participated was paid for their contribution to the show. So yes, a bit about the lore as well. Then we're publishing the travel logs. And then there's a series of, so there's 3 maps. So this will help kind of set out the scope of the exhibition. There's 3 little maps that fold out. So one is of the museum. And this is a map of the travels of the curators of the Carnegie International from 1991 till now. It's somewhat fanciful, but I think it makes the point. And then the third map is a map of Pittsburgh. And Liz Park contributed to the guide, a guide to Pittsburgh, as sort of narrated through how we explored the city with artists who came and spent time there with us. So these are the maps, the museum, the world, Pittsburgh. And then there's an essay entry for every participant in the exhibition. And these essays are linked to the exhibition itself. So this is the schematic for the design strategy, the publication strategy for the International. So there's the guide. And zoom down to the right, there's the label. So let's say it's a painting on the wall, might be a photograph. Might be a sculpture, I don't know. So there'll be very little didactics in the exhibition. The label will say artist name, title, courtesy, and then it will say, see page 45. So it's sending you back to the guide, which acts like an expanded wall text, and you can read it or not. So, or you can just move on with your plan. So the plan is the free handout that maps the exhibition. And then the dispatch is a second publication it's almost like the exhibition makes the dispatch. So it documents the International with fantastic photography and a totally accurate checklist by God. And it will appear shortly before the exhibition closes. And Leslie Hewitt's work for the International is a film that she is making with stills for the publication. This is just a stand-in for Leslie's work. So that is where you will find Leslie's work in the dispatch. So the design of the dispatch will be in expressing this phase of the catenary. So it's thinking about the exhibition becoming archive, about it becoming sort of snapping down like an umbrella, maybe, getting ready to be put away, but also sort of bundled up to be dispatched, to be thrown out over the fence, out into the world. So it carries a series of essays that are not about this Carnegie International, but about the biennial form, thinking about this form on a local, national, and international perspectives, sort of telescoping. And it's interesting that the essay on the sort of thinking about this form nationally is a conversation between the Carnegie International and the Queen's International. So the oldest international and the newest international. So anyway, so that's, okay, so where are we now? All right, we're back on the website. So, oh, maybe this is where I had to think about Whistler. Yeah, here it is. Right, you pop in Whistler's name. You see that he was in a whole bunch of internationals. He's not in mine. But now if you go onto the website and you also find the list of artists who are participating in this Carnegie International. And here they are, 32 artists and collectives and one independent exhibition maker. And I will read the national affiliations by residence and birth. Austria, Bahamas, Cameroon, Cherokee Nation, Colombia, England, Germany, Ghana, India, Japan, Jordan, Kenya, Korea, Kuwait, Lebanon, Navajo Nation, Nigeria, Nanoya Nation, Pakistan, Palestine, Scotland, Senegal, Switzerland, United States of America, and Vietnam. And no, I did not go to all those places. So this is the footprint of the International. It is very much in and of the museum. It saturates the galleries and the interim spaces. And I think of it as hugging the permanent collection, which you'll experience that when you come to see the show. You get to hug the permanent collection. And I'm going to really just very quickly introduce you to the artists in the International. So Yuji Agamatsu, who we will have 365 of his small sculptures from his Pack-A-Day series made daily walks, picking up debris and composing these tiny worlds. And they'll be in a space where Ankawara's date paintings were in 1991. So there's this kind of building on memories of past internationals built into the structure of the show. Al Anatsui is making a work for the facade of the museum. Here it is waiting. And here's Elle's drawing, and it joins printing plates from Pittsburgh, bottle caps from Nigeria, and a reflective material that he specifically wants to draw the Sarah into the work. And it's happening in two parallel universes, in his studio in Nsukka, and then in Wilkinsburg here in Pittsburgh, a sculptor, Dee Briggs, a fabricator, is working with Elle to make this monumental work of art. And as he employs his community, so has Dee employed her community to realize it. This is Art Labor Collective based in Ho Chi Minh City. And they brought Joan Jonas into their collective. Here's Joan with a recent winner of the Kyoto Prize. She got a poodle. But Joan was a Rolex mentor to one of the Art Labor Collective members. So they brought her in, and they are making a hammock cafe, and Joan is painting these traditional kites, and coffee will be served. Huma Baba, we all saw her magnificent work on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum. She's making new work for the International. Mel Bachner, Mel, born and bred in Pittsburgh, educated at Carnegie Mellon University, the great thinkers of conceptual art. The museum has collected his work, shown his work, but by gum, he's never been in a Carnegie International. So we are rectifying that. This is part of a new body of work that Mel's made for the show. But this is my favorite one because Mel was a tam o'shanter. Mimi Chirona Nyok, so an artist who is taking us thinking about photography and its peregrinations today. So Mimi herself is constantly on the move. Carin and I saw this work together. We're introduced to Mimi and her work at the Dakar Biennial. This is one of two photographs that were in the show. There's the other one. And I like that they just stuck the label right on Mimi's work. But Mimi has there's this incredible romanticism, but also this great pragmatism. This is just a piece of vinyl stuck on the wall. She said, I'm never going to see this thing again. So the work travels with this as much pragmatism as Mimi herself. There's that horse again. And you're going to see that horse again when you come to Pittsburgh. Lenka Clayton and John Rubin, artists with their own practices, artists with international careers, who, both based in Pittsburgh. They came together to do one of the inaugural projects for the social practice series that the Guggenheim recently started called Ring Around New York, where they moved 12 objects. Here's the world's oldest song coming to the Guggenheim. So I invited John and Lenka to team up for the International. They spent a lot of time doing research in the museum, exploring different approaches, and ultimately they landed on these index cards. So from the beginning to about 1931, the international artists submitted paintings for consideration. And there are these meticulously kept cards that say if you were rejected, 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 rejected. But here in 1926, accepted was Scenes from the Scottish Highlands by this artist, John Cain. Yeah, who, yes, John Cain, the Pittsburgh artist. So other works rejected from past internationals. This is, a time when Untitled was really not a possibility. So there's 10,632 of these things. And the museum will become a site of production to turn these rejects into paintings on paper for visitors to take home. So there's John and Lenka hiding behind their work. Oop. Sarah Crowner, an artist participating in the International, who have us think about where's painting today. So painting, the idea of painting is left the canvas, and painting might be and tiles on the floor. So this is a painting by Sarah, 2 paintings by Sarah Crowner. And this is a painting in progress for the International, being set by a tile maker in Braddock, her dog Bucko. And here it's coming together. Tiles made in Mexico to make this new work. Alex DeCorta is building a house out of neon. A house out of neon that he's going to fill with 57 cartoons, starring Bugs Bunny, but inside that Bugs Bunny is Alex DeCorta. So, and inside that Sylvester the Cat is Alex DeCorta having a money moment on a sort of wonk Frank Stella. And this is a little uncanny. Inside that Mr. Rogers is Alex DeCorta. And Mr. Rogers, The Land of Make-Believe, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that came out of public television in Pittsburgh. So Tacita Dean. So where is film today? Tacita is actively battling its obsolescence. So this is a work that she made for the 2016 Sydney Biennial event for a stage, working with the actor Stephen Delane, 4 live performances, magically stitched together into one seamless night. And it was made and shown in a black box theater, and Tacita always wanted it to be shown in a jewel box theater. And Carnegie, it's like, well, we have one of those. So we have this Carnegie Music Hall. So we'll be screening this film weekly as film. Jeremy Deller. So Jeremy Deller makes really big public sculptures. But for the 2004 Carnegie International, he made what may be the world's smallest video installation. So kind of bringing the war back home, period wars for period rooms. These are our miniature period rooms at the museum. So this work is coming back. So there's 2 artists who are returning to the Carnegie International. So Jeremy's one with that work. But then he's also doing a special Tam O'Shanter session with 3 public schools. And then an exhibition will come out of it where we'll see America today through children's eyes. So the project will be happening in February. So the Carnegie International itself is part of this Carnegie International. Kevin Jerome Everson, filmmaker, 8-hour day in a factory, will be screened in our magnificent grand staircase where there is a mural program called The Crowning of Labor, and here's a detail: men toiling, building the industrial city, and showgirls carrying away the knights and captains of industry. So this is this incredible mural of a sort of fantasy of industry, and Kevin will be the context for Kevin's film. And it will be in the same place, for those who have a memory of Cal Fay's installation from Life on Mars. This was her video made in a Chinese light bulb factory. So thinking about all of this. So Leslie heard about her work for the Dispatch, and she's talking about how she really enjoys that her work is will be a rumor at the International. So the filmmaker In Hun Sung, I had been talking to as a participant in the International and started a conversation with Hong Kong, the writer, to actually to invite her to be a writer for the exhibition, and she was more interested in working as a visual artist and wanted to be paired with another artist, and they both live in Seoul. They are making an installation that really is about a conversation, a correspondence that comes together around mourning mothers. So this is a curatorial project started by the International. Saba Inab, an architect who I was thinking about sculpture in the Hall of Architecture. So the museum is just a museum of museums. So there's a hall of sculpture of casts and fragments, and Saba is modeling a sculpture on a destroyed tunnel in the Gaza Strip, a sort of a ruin. It will be in the Hall of Architecture. Carin Kuoni, I did a major survey of Carin's work in Philadelphia, so I'm not going to do an international, not inviting Carin. So we have a three-part program. One part, an installation, Carin's paintings and sculptures sort of invading our hall of, our collection of decorative arts, these bursts of salon installations. We're collaborating with the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. On the day of the opening, there will be a ballet collage. It's Carin's appreciation of the work of Marius Petipa, moments that are very significant for her, cut and pasted together and then performed by these dancers in the Hall of Music. And then the museum has, right smack in the middle of the Carnegie International, there is the holiday trees. The Women's Committee erects 5 giant Christmas trees. And so this year is the first time there'll be a collaboration with the International. Carin gave the Women's Committee 5 themes to inspire their 5 trees. So Zoe Leonard, this International intersects with an ongoing project. Zoe's been exploring the Rio Grande as it forms a natural boundary between Mexico and the United States. So we'll have a sort of prologue to this larger body of work. This would be like the Rio Grande will be ribboning the balcony of the Hall of Sculpture. Carrie James Marshall is here's our beautiful Carrie James Marshall painting in the museum's collection, which we recently acquired. Carrie's first time at the Carnegie Museum was in 1999 at Madeline Grinstein's Carnegie International, where Carrie began the Rhythm Master series of comics. It was distributed through the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and then he also used the newspaper to turn the treasure room into what looked like a boarded-up store window. So I approached Carrie. I was interested in maybe could we simply republish this kind of the sort of comic for this very significant body of work for Carrie. And they said, oh, funny you call. I've been wanting to go back to #1 and redraw it in the language that I've since evolved for the Rhythm Master comics. So he's redrawing Rhythm Master #1 for the International. Park MacArthur came to the museum, and she was very taken by the material of the institution itself, and has been collecting sound recordings at the quarry in Norway, where the stone of the museum comes from. I look at this as like this big hole in Norway is where this big museum came from. So there'll be a sound piece by Park. Josiah McElhaney invited the curators John Corbett and Jim Dempsey to do part 2 of a curatorial project, Space is a Diamond. The curatorial project is Dusty Groove. Space is a Diamond is the second iteration. So it's an exhibition within the exhibition. And I think of it as being sort of centripetal around two maverick figures of modern music, Harry Partch and Paulina Oliveras, and other musicians and artists whose work is evoked through objects and ephemera. Here's a sculpture by Josiah thinking about Harry Partch. And it loops in another little modernist moment from Pittsburgh. There was this space called Outlines in the 1940s. Betty Rockwell-Raphael organized this space, which she called a gallery, a library, and a theater for modern art. So today we'd call that a discursive space. And Josiah and John and Jim have sort of looped outlines into their project. And Space is a Diamond will also occasion a day of deep listening with Joe McPhee. Ulrika Muller, like Sarah Crowner, has us thinking about where is painting today, and maybe painting is underfoot in carpets, or painting on the wall. So here's a schematic of what Ulrika is staging. Thaddeus Mosley, Pittsburgh-based sculptor, work in our collection. Thaddeus talks, we have a studio visit with Thaddeus, and he talks about finding his vocation as an artist in the 1958 Carnegie International, seeing the work of Isamu Noguchi. And he's seen and studied every international since. There'll be a major installation of Thaddeus's work. And when you come to Pittsburgh and you take the little trolley from the airport, you will hear the voice of Thaddeus Mosley welcoming you to Pittsburgh. So the Autolith Group, this is work of the Autolith Group, people to be resembling. They call it a redreaming of the making of the record Cadona, a classic recording of ECM records that brings together experimental jazz and world music. And this is work I saw, and I just kept wanting to see it again and again and again and again, so I can. It will be playing in the Carnegie International. Again, it's just, it is a dream of a redreaming. Post-commodity, the indigenous collective, this work was very visible, although only briefly visible. This, the repellent fence, a mile into Mexico, a mile into the US, with these scare eye balloons up for 4 days, vanished, but an indelible image of our world of shifting terrain, of borders and boundaries, this world that we live in today, this international world we live in today. So they're in this space. They're in this space, but I'm not going to show you what's there. You'll have to come see. But the piece that they've installed will be performed as a graphic score. Daily Pittsburgh, 12 musicians they've engaged to come interpret the piece. Jesse Reeves, sculptor who makes sculpture that looks like it's eaten by or eating furniture. Her installation is in the Heinz Architectural Center. And when she was here for a site visit, she was very interested in visiting Falling Water, the Frank Lloyd Wright House. It's just a little bit outside of Pittsburgh, but further than you think. If you're coming for this international and you think you're going to drive up the road, it's not just up the road. It's 2 hours away, and you should make your reservation last week. But she ended up having a short residency at Falling Water, and in concert with the International, they're locating a work by Jesse's in the house. Abel Rodriguez, he is a namer of plants in his Noinoya community. And from memory, he draws the plants, the cycles, the animals of the Amazonian rainforest. And so there'll be a group of these drawings that are truly drawing knowledge onto paper. Rachel Rose, many of you probably saw this Lake Valley, this animated, Rachel's first animated video at the Venice Biennale, and she's rethinking the installation of this film for the International. Beverly Sams is bringing her feminist responsibility project to the Carnegie International. And there's a video component as well. Dayanita Singh, based in India, or New Delhi, has thought a lot about how she gets her work out in the world through photo books, but also through these portable museums and exhibitions. She's making a new exhibition, new portable exhibition for the International. Lucy Scare, I love this. It's another work that I just saw on my travels, and I'm like, I just want to look at that for a really long time, so it's in. This is like it's an index of all printmaking. There's, I think I have a detail. There's lithography. There's woodblock. There's digital printing. There's chincolle, and so this work and new work that Lucy's making for the International. Tavares Strawn, great picture of Tavares about to take us all to the moon. These are he's making work for the exterior of the building. Here's his team of drone flyers. preparing to make the work that you will see, that will be a surprise, illuminating invisible histories. Lynette Udomboake, the painter who assembles casts of characters, these fictitious characters in her work, new body of work installed by Lynette. And then the independent exhibition maker. So Dig Where You Stand, a second exhibition within the exhibition by Koya Koya, who is the founding director of Raw Material Company in Senegal and identifies as an independent exhibition maker. I invited Koyo to, this is the Eflux press release about her project, to draw from across the museum's collections to make an exhibition within the exhibition that might show the museum, our collections to us in new ways. And she has, as you will see. Dig Where You Stand. So the museum is the steward of the Teenie Harris Archive, an amazing collection of negatives, over 8,000 negatives of America at mid-century. Here's Teenie Harris. He was a professional newspaper photographer for the Pittsburgh Courier, black newspaper in Pittsburgh. And Teenie's famous for his photographs of people, so we will have an installation with photographs by Teenie that have no people in them, and it will be a mapping of Pittsburgh. And last but not least, the Cinematheque, 4 screenings, a series of 4 screenings over the course of the exhibition. And they're cued to, each is themed to one of the interpretive threads of the International: sound, beauty, politics, children, and maybe we'll talk more about what is an interpretive thread, but there they are. And that might be it. Yeah. Please. Okay.
Great. So we have a brief conversation and then we'll open it up to questions from you. Ingrid, yes. Please come from the car, actually. Here we go. A little personal memory about you. Obviously, okay. It's an extraordinary construction that you've built over several years, and it is an incredibly beautiful and cohesive structure that you walked us through very convincingly and in a very thoughtful and convincing way. I'd love to understand more, or have you explain it to us, where it began, because as you pointed out, the International is the oldest recurring international survey show in the US. It has a great history, it also has great expectations, and there you are, invited to be the curator of the 57th edition, and you first of all make a decision, it's just going to be you, your curatorial perspective is the one that guides the entire research, and you respond to this prompt that it is should be an international show. Can you explain to us a little more about the first few steps and decisions that were decisive in identifying through lines, thematic through lines, or some of the procedures that led to this construction of a show?
I'll try. The International, you get the call. I got the call from Lynn Zelevansky, was then the director in late 2014. I moved to Pittsburgh in summer of 2015 and began. And just to say, so I've been at the ICA for 15 years and I was ready for something, fresh challenges, but also knowing that this is an exhibition that's going to allow you to travel in a way. I'd never traveled before. I did not think of myself as an international to global curator. And I don't know if I do now, but so it was an opportunity to open up my own work and research, and I know there was a process of deciding that it was just going to be me, because I could have constructed it different ways. Maybe it's from seeing in our field exhibitions where there are these consortiums and committees and wanting a point of view. So I thought that's what I wanted to construct by taking this on myself. So there's probably more to it than that, and I'll think about it and offer more. But
you know, having worked with you or known or followed your work for quite some time, to me that's such a decisive moment that combines core characteristics of you, which are a combination of fearless embrace of responsibility and risk-taking, and at the same time also a humility that allows you to look elsewhere and to look where other people have not looked, because you are able to look outside of your position. And what I mean by that is that you accept the responsibility of actually doing the show yourself, and you also say, you know, it is just a show that incorporates or represents one individual's perspective, and that is legitimate enough.
maybe to say too that I made a structure that's very purposefully about collaboration and having the creative team be integral from the beginning. About really, we made these design through lines, and we thought about the publication and how the exhibition sits on the wall is a process. This was something constructed with the creative team and my curatorial team. If you come to our office, it's corny. We all sit around one table. I mean, it's, and having the companion. So I made a structure that I built the structure, but I made it so that there's a lot of places for collaboration and other voices to shape, and that's for the benefit of my own work, because I think I've collaborated a lot, and there's nothing more satisfying than a collaboration that takes you beyond yourself. So maybe I had built in a lot of places for that to occur, but I had to, yeah.
Well, certainly speaking as a travel companion, the experience of going together to a place or destination that neither of us had ever visited was really extraordinary, and that was the condition, and the condition of your invitation, that we would find a destination that neither you or I knew or had been, or at least we had never been to. And to arrive, in our case, in Marrakesh, and embark on this 2.5-week journey of shared learning, where we really spent together day and night, more or less, was a situation I have not experienced since probably, I don't know, elementary school. So, plus we shared not just the experience, but we shared, of course, also the attribute that we were new to this situation and exploring and living it together. So it brought a proximity and a closeness that was quite unusual, and I'm sure was duplicated in other ways in the collaborations with the creative team or the curatorial team as well.
So there was in having a traveling companion, there was also something for myself there. I know I'm more open when I travel someplace and I'm with another person. And to navigate and negotiate all these new places and all this travel, and even just to have a colleague who will watch your bag while you go to the bathroom, or when kind of figuring things out, that was very useful in the process of travel. And these itineraries were very intense, and they were deeply researched by Liz Park, who would take Carin's leads and my few leads, and she would really work her network and their networks to make these itineraries that were very rigorous, and we were constantly on the move. And the criteria or the charge to Liz was these were not trips to go find artists for the Carnegie International. They were really about understanding how the contemporary takes hold in other places I didn't, that were unfamiliar, art worlds that were unfamiliar. So it was, yes, we had studio visits, but the focus was on spaces and curators and hubs and meeting writers and really understanding how our field is networked in other places.
And in doing so, really exploring in a very interesting way notions of time and temporality and sequence and history or archive. And here I'm referring to Emmanuel Iduma, who, as you said, was commissioned to do travelogue for our section of, or for our travels. And it was just such an incredibly interesting charge that we would go to a place we didn't know, filled with anticipation, expectations, and projections into this realm that, again, was unfamiliar to us. We would come back to New York, meet with Emmanuel, tell him about our travels, and then he would write the history or the story of this travel based on what we had told him, but his own personal biographical or subjective recollections of that place. And this merging of our projections and his recollections into a completely new and contemporary story seems to be a core idea of the show, to find that moment where past and present or time frames collapse or become visible through an exhibition or through all these other elements.
Right, you're so aware when you're traveling, like how little are you knowing? Yes. And so this kind of, what do you call it, like kind of constant suspension moving forward allows that sense that the travel doesn't end, there's no authority here, it just keeps moving through other subjectivities, other knowledges. But I have to say, of the 5 companions that I traveled with, Carin is the only one who instituted that we had to have seminars every 3 days. Other travelers, we had to go shopping maybe to have a little break from time to time, but no, we had seminars. So there was also this processing too of what we were seeing and not seeing, and kind of driving each other forward, which made it very rich.
One last question, then I definitely, I'm sure you would want to ask your own questions, and it concerns the infrastructure or the structure you've created with the creative team and the question of visibility, because it seems so interesting to me that there are several projects like John Rubin's, for instance, that brings out into a visible or public realm, again, work that either has been forgotten or ignored or wasn't there or is part of history. Could you talk a little bit about what makes a work present as an artwork or as a documentation through the catalog or as a text or an interview that is published on the website? How did you choose the appropriate platform or format to bring this unknown or this forgotten or this invisible into the awareness of the next 3 months or 5 months, the exhibition visitor, and for much, much longer, the website visitor?
So I'm always thinking about archives and histories. And this idea of a short history of the contemporary is very present in how I construct and interpret this exhibition. And it's not just to tell this short history, but to animate it and to do what the contemporary does. And the contemporary, to me, is not moving forward like my international lops off the head of Dan, and Tina's international and is the next one. Maybe that's an art fair. But the contemporary exhibition, the curatorial, is time and connections moving this way and sideways and backwards and drilling down and being curlicue. And so that, making this thing that's dynamic in that way and moving in many directions is maybe how the past doesn't just feel like resuscitated in the exhibition. It's just part of one of the many directions that these connections are traveling.
Questions? I think we've had this one here, another one here.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Ingrid. You're great. So, over the last 4 years, you've been on quite a journey, geographically, scholastically. I'm curious, were there any moments where you were really surprised or shocked, where you were heading in one direction and you had a revelation, might be a very cliche word, but something that really surprised you and encouraged you or prompted you to pivot or turn around?
Maybe, can we talk together about our trip to Gorey Island? So Carin and I together, because also the travel and research was taking us to historic sites, relevant historic places as well. So when we were in Senegal, we went to Gorey Island, which was the island of no return, where many people left Africa as slaves, and it was part of the become part of the triangle trade between, yeah. So we both went, I think, with similar expectations of an American memorial or a national park site or a place of mourning and commemoration. And it wasn't. It was a tourist site for guilty white or European people, or it was our history that we brought to this place. It was not the history of the people that live there now. And so that early on, that experience was, I don't know if it made me turn around, but it certainly gave pause. And so maybe can you say a little more?
Nothing really to add. It was a utter surprise, and we were caught in our own expectations or prejudice or the trappings of our limited knowledge or history. And I also felt we were not able to overcome that. We were stuck in it for good reasons, but it instilled an awareness of just the difference that we have, even if if history is linked, or a particular historical incident or trauma belongs to both groups, we won't be able to actually approach it from someone else's perspective. Or it would be hard.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I was really struck by how complex your curatorial process was. It seemed to me as much art as any of the artists that you might have included in the exhibition. So my question is about the idea of the history of the contemporary. It is specifically about the relationship between curators today and artists. It's hard for me to see how there's a distinction between what you did and what the artists did. They're both art.
Let
me finish my question. Let me finish my question. They're very compelling statements, but they're very different, and the overarching impression that leaves me with a question is the curatorial process is extremely verbal, and the artists are presented almost apolitically, even though I know a lot of them are very political. So I'd like a little bit more insight about those distinctions, if you see distinctions.
So my work is very crafted. I've thought about every aspect of this international, which I've been telling my colleagues for 3 years, but that it's already happening. It culminates in an exhibition, but this is the international of all of it. And yes, it's creative and it's crafted, but it's not. It's not what the artists who are participating in the exhibition and bringing their work to the show. I'm creating a space for their work, or a context for their work.
I think you're underestimating the artistry that goes into making this.
Well, there's artistry and craft and anything well executed. So I thank you for observing it in this project in its bones. Thanks. Oh, it's Josiah McElhaney.
As you've laid out the exhibition, obviously you've chosen projects that deal with, some of the most important and vital issues that are, facing the global community, from migration to borders to, I would assume, climate change in some aspects, and we could go on and on. But in the thematics, you use the word children, and when you described the exhibition, the humor with which you describe aspects of it, I believe that there's some spirit of humor within how you approach the whole project, and it reminded me of my impression of going to some of these large-scale exhibitions and the kind of feeling of the utter lack of that essential human experience of the response to global urgencies of humor. And children. It's impossible to think of children without the concept of humor, I think. And so I just wondered whether humor is actually something that you considered as part of the deep seriousness of the construct of the exhibition.
I never think about humor. It's just there. But so which part of that will I take? So children. So these interpretive threads for the exhibition, we all know, because we all have to hear how challenging contemporary art is, and I can't, it's just I need to know too much, and so these interpretive threads are offered to visitors to say, you carry your own compass through this show, or experiences, or way to move through it, with these 3 or 4, I call them frequencies, so you can tune into. So thinking about children for me is the way children never say to you, contemporary art is so challenging. They're just bored or interested in what they're bored or interested in. So I would invite us all to be that way in the exhibition. And then politics is where we're making connections outside of ourselves to other people, to other conditions. So that is a way that politics can be a frequency to move through the exhibition and engage with these conditions of the world today that are made manifest through what the artists are bringing, but there's nothing in the exhibition that's like, now we will deal with global warming. These are conditions, and they're brought to the exhibition through what the artists, what you're creating. And then beauty is, there are many beauties. Some beauties are very ugly, but we all come to art for beauty. So find your beauties in the international. And then sound, so the Carnegie Museum, shortly after I started working there, the president of the museums circulated a memo. A letter had come to her from a visitor who was very upset. When he was looking at the Impressionist paintings, he could hear a video in one of the other galleries was just ruining his experience. And so, so sound, we know, means art is alive, and that is the contemporary, art is alive. So you can, there's much to listen to in the international. So, yeah, that's how we're gonna move. With humor. Bring your own humor, yeah. Oh.
I'm interested in the connection you made with the Queen's International, especially you're talking about, you said it so eloquently, the short history of the contemporary, because of course the Queen's International is a product of our recent past, and the impetus for it was kind of in this post-9/11 moment and finding the global within the local. So I know you're probably going to write about it for the catalog, but if you could just expand on that, it's really interesting.
So that contribution to the dispatch, Liz Park has been in conversation with Larissa Harris and her colleagues at the Queen's International to sort of parry and play with these two internationals. When Tom Finkelpearl started the first Queen's International, Larissa said it was very tongue-in-cheek to call it the Queen's International, and yet their international is far more international than the Pittsburgh Carnegie International because of the composition of queens. So, and then locally in Pittsburgh, when I started the project, as every curator that comes to town to do the international does, you convene your colleagues, the other curators, the arts activators in town, and I wanted to introduce myself and my project to my new colleagues, and said, 2018, I'll be doing the Carnegie International. Let's talk about the bigger topography of Pittsburgh as a cultural site when all these people come to town. And so let's start thinking now, what about what you'll be doing? And maybe we can make a map. And silence. And one of my colleagues said, basically, Ingrid, we don't want to be on your map. We've been on the maps of other Carnegie Internationals. No, thank you. And so a conversation evolved around the privilege of research, like the great privilege that I've had to travel the world researching this exhibition. And for my colleagues who don't have that privilege, somebody floated the idea, well, what if there were grants for us to do some travel and research? So I partnered with Janera Solomon, who runs the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, a community-based theater in East Liberty in Pittsburgh. And we raised money for 20 microgrants to seed local research on Keyword International is to define for you, for your organization, for your ambition, your aspirations. What is international? Is it your audience? Is it your network? There was over 50 people submitted. There were 20 grants given. The summer's been spent doing research. And in October, there'll be a symposium, the presentations around the findings, and then that will be the essay in the dispatch that is a sort of case study for what does international mean in a small American city for the contemporary culture there. So, yeah. It's a creative. Prem? No?
Sorry, I kind of, in the midst of you talking about that and just the mode of raising money from microgrants for other organizations, in the midst of also bringing, you know, a number of curatorial colleagues with you and creating all of these other structures, kind of brings me back, interestingly, to Carin's first question, where Carin, you seem to kind of really hook on to the fact of Ingrid as an individual making this biennial, or I mean, sorry, this international. But what it occurs to me is like maybe as a corollary, it's almost it seems like you're creating communities along the way in multiple ways and using these institutional structures to kind of seed things that are well outside of yourself. And so it kind of somehow makes me think that it's almost like to be a good part of any community, perhaps you have to be an individual as well. And there's that kind of, there's that way of kind of having your own position and your own subjectivity there, which is what allows you to then be generous in another way. It wasn't really a question, sorry about that.
Well, to enter into the short history of the contemporary Carnegie International, and as we're all wondering, you know, what can this forum be? What can these exhibitions be? And we all ask the question of how do we contend with the local and international to global art world? And this thing touches down in Pittsburgh, and there's a community with a long engagement with this international. So how can I use this forum for it to be generative? And that too is the thinking to not make the big catalog, which we determined at the first charrette. We didn't need to make that book, which you did need to make in previous internationals, because you couldn't go to your phone and find out who was Christian Boltanski. You know, you needed that book too. That was your guide, that was your resource. But we don't need those big books now. So what else can the publication do or open up? So here's one modeling of that.
I also just thought it was, you know, going back to this first observation, it was remarkable that you would not appoint a committee of informers, I was going to say, or consultants who would do the research on your behalf, and that you would at some point come back and say, okay, this is a survey of what's happening in terms of contemporary art internationally that seems important and interesting. And instead, it was a travel through various areas in order to understand what is the contemporary moment, and then have that inform the individual artist's choices. So, as you say, Prem, you know, putting subjectivity and one's own personal biography as a perfectly legitimate criterion to plan the travels, for instance, or then to launch in these collaborations and produce the networks or activate the networks.
And how essentially it has to take you out of yourself at every turn. Made me think of something, but it went right out of my head. Maybe there's a question.
We will take two more questions.
Hi, Ingrid. I'm actually Larissa Harris's husband, who was just mentioned, and she's from Pittsburgh, and so is Tom Finkelpearl. And I believe you were...
That's what you reminded me of. I'm from Pittsburgh, yeah.
Before you moved to California. But I keep going to this cross of Pittsburgh Bridge to the Carnegie International, and it reminds me of when I was visiting the Carnegie one time, there was a book that described Pittsburgh as the Paris of Appalachia. I just wonder if you could talk about that idea of being the center of culture for that region, but also just the responsibility that comes with that. Because I feel like you're kind of talking about that, but maybe to put it in that way, of like the Paris of Appalachia. We might be able to understand
I have a lot to say about that, but maybe to go back to children. I'm from Pittsburgh. The Carnegie Museum was my first museum, so it made me a citizen of museums. And when you come to our museum, it is filled with children who start with dinosaurs and they make their way up to art, or maybe they're both, always in both. But we lived in Pittsburgh till I was 10, so I came back to do this exhibition, so I still have like a kind of child's, I came back with a child's experience of this institution. And I do think it has a role in making citizens of museums and culture. And so to Paris of Appalachia, it was big news to me when I learned that Pittsburgh was not on the East Coast, which came kind of late in life. I thought it was like New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, yeah. But Pittsburgh is, but nor is it the Midwest. I understand it now to really truly be a Galapagos. It's in Appalachia. It's in those mountains, and even in itself, it has 97 distinctive neighborhoods. Some people never even leave their own Galapagos within the Galapagos, and it was a linguist's place of study because there were all these groups that had come from different parts of Europe, and their languages never changed. And of course, now that is all changed. It's not the Galapagos of languages anymore, and it's turning into a much more sort of more flattened international place. But
One time it was also like the most western frontier, right? So when
Yeah.
Washington was like, out in Pittsburgh, it was the frontier. So it's kind of a funny place where it was the edge of the country at one point.
yeah, Boston had their Tea Party. We had our Whiskey Rebellion in Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
I was wondering, there were comments during the introductory comments about the sort of very fast changing political context domestically and internationally during the time that you were putting this together, and I was wondering what impact did that have as you were sort of working through this and traveling around? Was it sort of a direct impact on your thoughts, or were you trying to kind of transcend any given sort of singular moment in history for something kind of broader? How did it play into the choices you were making?
So when I embarked on the project, international just seemed like some quaint holdover from Carnegie Internationals of yore. It's a small world after all, and then the assumption that we are, we're in a global art world. And so it just seemed like some attribute of its history, this quaint idea of the international. And then 2016, year of travel begins and Brexit happens. And Magali and I are in the Philippines, and they've elected Duarte to be their heavy man president, and we're sitting in a cab, and we're listening to, the cab driver is very attentively listening to a list of names being read off, and this is a list of names of people that are irritating President Duarte this week. Stay tuned next week, hope you're not on the list. So then, and then an election happens here, and so these sort of this pressure on the idea of the international and worlds getting smaller everywhere is everywhere. And it's changed the way we all are thinking about this word right now. Nations within nations, and shifting borders and boundaries and people on the move. And so this international, to not be thinking about this idea of the small world after all, where we have national representation from here, there, and everywhere, and we count the number of people from, but more that the exhibition brings conditions that might be recognized internationally, globally, as relevant conditions to be living in this moment, with the conditions of histories of coloniality and the effects of late capitalism and climate change. I mean, these are recognizable conditions everywhere. So in a way that kind of freed me from that sort of anxiety of travel to do my art Olympics. I think, yeah.
You've also spoken about the quality of the relationships that you build up, and I think that's one particular connecting tissue in the show. The way you described it, this very distinct quality of careful engagement, and that is what connects these various places in the world, in these various projects, to the location in Pittsburgh. So it's not a geographical distance, it's maybe a thematic link, but it is also just the responsibility and attention to every single detail that makes an artwork present that you've applied.
And the word link is so critical. Because like I said, that to me, that is the work of the contemporary. We can talk about contemporary work, and that could just be, you know, stuff that was made tomorrow. But the work of the contemporary is the work we all are doing when we're connecting with our colleagues, connecting with each other's work, that is, I want to feel that dynamism in the exhibition. And so Pittsburgh is a site where the point isn't that, oh, and this exhibition includes artists from Pittsburgh, but that these artists are connected to to this art world of this international.
And so are we, very
And
soon.
so are we, yes, yes.
In about a month.
Yeah.
So, Ingrid, thank you very, very much. It was incredibly illuminating and wonderful. Thank you. I also want to thank you all very much for coming. I think we're now part of Ingrid's constellation of various groups. And I do want to mention what I neglected to say earlier, that you are a member of the Vera List Center's advisory committee. And as a group, we travel in 4 weeks to Pittsburgh to have special intersections or intersect with the exhibition on various occasions. So there's more information on the Vera List Center field trip to Pittsburgh, and we hope to see you soon in one form or another there. Thank you.
Thank you.